Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we discuss all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring. All right, Zoe, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, let's go into the next topic. So the next topic is, I guess, the menstrual cycle. As a male human being, I'm not going to know much about this. I know a little bit. I know unfortunately, it is associated with injuries as well. But let's talk about it from more of a training perspective, and we'll also talk it from a performance perspective. Then we'll also break it down into the injury side. But give us a bit of an overview. So today I'm going to be I'm newbie to this. I want to learn a little bit more and have a bit more understanding, especially for the females, the coach here as well. Yeah, give me a general gist of what the menstrual cycle is, and then we'll go a bit more into detail in terms of and how do we regulate it when it comes to training, or how do we understand it, how it influences our training.
Yeah, I'll start with the basics. So menstrual cycle is completely different for every single individual. The basic length is 28 days, textbook I guess you'd say. It can vary between 21 to 35. It can be completely different to that as well. Some people can have their cycle once every 3 months. But basically the first half of the cycle is the follicular phase, and that's when we bleed at the first day, and then ovulation is at the end of that 14 kind of day period, and that's generally pretty regular. And then the second phase, which is the second half of the period, is the luteal phase, which is the more variable phase where individuals just experience things a lot differently. This phase is the one that can be a lot shorter or a lot longer, and that kind of determines the length of the actual period as well. So generally the first phase is going to be around that 14-day mark, and then this second phase can be longer and shorter.
Okay, so we've got a bit of an idea. Let's talk about how does it influence, I guess, the training.
Yeah, before I go into this, I just want to say that the research is very low quality at this point. So everything that is said is kind of suggested. It's not.
Take it as a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
A grain of salt.
Pinch of salt.
Pinch of salt, whatever it is. Grain of salt.
Yeah, that's it. But basically in the follicular phase, when we're going through our menstrual cycle and when we're ovulating, so we produce estrogen, release more estrogen, and this is when we can feel a lot more fatigued and also ligament laxity can occur. So for training, it's still not necessarily proven that injuries can happen more at this point in time, but it's kind of suggested. So ACL injuries and it's kind of said that it may happen at this time as well. And then in the later phases, when we produce more progesterone, that's then said that we feel a bit more strong. We might feel like exercise isn't as hard, so lower rating of perceived RPE. That's again not necessarily a strong point of evidence, but it's just kind of
it's just like a common theme that's seen at that phase.
Yeah. And so then basically with all of that said, everything is so individualized to the person. So it's more about figuring out at what stages in the cycle you feel better off or you feel worse. So people might experience cramps, they might experience PMS, and all this sort of stuff generally happens in the luteal phase, which is just before the actual period itself. So it could be bloating, it could be pain, it could just be fatigue and that sort of stuff. And so if the athlete or the person is aware of where in their cycle this happens, they can then take it a little bit easier or figure out what they need to do themselves to make the training easier for them.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of kind of how some of the athletes that you've worked with that have kind of helped, they've had these issues, but they've kind of better navigated their menstrual cycle, and as a result, their training is still really good at the end of the day?
Yeah. So one of my girls from footy, from Coburg, she experienced really bad cramps in her period, but she finds that if she actually eats more carbohydrates, filled foods before exercise, she actually feels a lot better. So eating is another thing that it can actually, if you make sure that you're eating well before training, it actually seems to help a lot. So she still experienced cramps, but she finds that her stomach just feels a lot better while she's training.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's actually able to reach like high intensity during footy trainings as well.
So it's like that she's setting herself up. She knows it's going to happen. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
So she's really just setting herself up for it to happen, but reducing the severity.
Yeah, because we know for most people the cycle is going to happen every month, and for most people they experience these symptoms every month. So that's why I find tracking the period is really important. There's a few different apps you can use. There's just simple ones like Flow and Clue, and they are just basically to figure out when your cycle is, and it might say ovulation. But then there's also some sport specific. So there's one called Fitter Woman, and there's also something AI. I can put them in the show notes. Do we do that? Put them in the show notes?
We'll put the links in the show notes.
Yeah. And those two are more athletic based, so you can actually see at the different stages of the cycle different symptoms, but you can see what type of activity it typically says you should be doing, which we're not necessarily going to focus on, but it might just say like a bit lower intensity at this stage in the cycle, or prioritize carbs, prioritize fats. Like it actually says that on the app, which is really good.
That's really neat.
Yeah, really helpful for especially youth who might not actually have any idea.
Yeah, and let's link it back to the youth now. So obviously, again, the first time going through the menstrual cycle or something like that, and I don't know what the education is like when it comes to health and human development these days. And I think it's really worthwhile, especially for a lot of parents with like teenage girls, with 13, 14, 15, when the cycle starts for the first time, is like, really becoming more educated on it, and really kind of not getting ahead of the game essentially, but having some knowledge and background in terms of, especially as a parent, of like when you can actually nourish the kids as well, and maybe to begin to educate your daughters on this specifically, because then they're going to have better self-management tools as they start going year 10, year 11, year 12, university as well, because I don't know, I'm assuming it's just something that's not spoken about because it seems as like taboo, I guess.
It's weird. Like when I got my period, I wanted my mum to give me a book. Some of my friends had books given by their parents, and it's like I just wanted to know everything about it, where everyone would kind of pretend they're embarrassed about it. But I think, it just needs to be spoken about, and it needs to be brought up often. Just the fact that it's going to happen, and these things are going to, like, you might, get cramps, you might feel really fatigued and that sort of stuff. But then it's not inevitable to feel like that every single time. Like we can put things in place to feel better. Yeah,
it's just a preventative approach for not feeling like crap.
Like you're still probably going to feel like crap.
Yeah, well, less crap, essentially.
Well, less crap. And then even just the things of like, oh, my period's coming up, I'm going to eat a whole lot of chocolate. Like that's actually, you actually feel like you need to eat more, but prioritizing eating more fuel for training rather than just giving up on everything in that time.
Yeah, rather than just, like, go with like the fuck it mentality. I was like, fuck it, I was going to go like get some Daniel's Donuts or something like that.
Yeah. But on that as well, for if any males are listening, that actually everything does really build up. So mood, food, fatigue, it's real. And it all builds up in one go. Like,
yeah, I want to go back to a story. So for those who don't know, I was at the University of Wisconsin back in 2017. I was an intern there, and I was working with a lot of teams, but I was responsible for the cheerleading team. Now, I think it was and the dance team as well. So I think it was like 10 guys, and there's maybe like between 40 and 50 girls. Right? Now, I don't know if this is the thing, but it felt like their periods had synced up. So
it can happen.
It's
not scientifically proven.
I know.
But
yeah, if it's not scientific, but it felt like that. As soon as like it got to the end of the semester, and the girls were just, the energy levels had just shifted a little bit. Usually they're pretty like upbeat and perky. But yeah, it just completely, one day, one girl was like, oh, could we do something different? I was like, then after that was literally the trigger. And I was like, oh, come on, Trent, let's do something different. It's like, all right. Give me 2 seconds to think this through. And eventually, they felt better afterwards. So we ended up just going outside, Unfortunately, the gym that we're in was underground, and because I was in Wisconsin, it was like heading into spring, and it's just like it's cold, and the winter is usually pretty depressing. Like you get like maybe 7 hours of sunlight a day, which is pretty bad. And I did get seasonal depression, and obviously, being in a colder state or city, where there's limited sunlight as well, it's obviously going to affect the mood as well. So then you got as we've spoken about in the other episode, you got these multiple inputs. They're going to potentially make these outputs even worse. So, like, to me, that was a very interesting experience to be a part of. But yeah, it definitely does affect their mood in terms of like, what potentially, they're going to dump it on you. It's like, all right, cool, I'll sort it out. And eventually they just felt better. And sometimes, as we've spoken before, reducing the load, the intensity, and just making them feel better afterwards is probably just like the key in order of like that long term, or thinking more in the long term than anything else.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to touch on, from a coaching point of view, for especially male coaches, maybe in like sporting teams, I just think that it needs to be something it doesn't always need to be brought up, but if an athlete is noticeably performing a little bit worse, if you're comfortable with the athlete, don't say it if you're not comfortable with the athlete, but just saying, are you close to your period? Is it coming up? It can potentially be explaining why they're not performing as well, and it might be something that you can take into consideration, rather than, I think athletes just ignore it, especially when talking to coaches, like as in a head coach, because they don't want it to seem as a weakness, and they don't want it to be like a reason why they're performing less.
Yeah, so let's talk about the tricky part of like if you are in a semi-professional, and it's pretty competitive at the semi-professional level, especially in women's sports here in Victoria. Even in the junior development side, if you're seen as a potential liability, that you might be out or sick, next person up mentality, especially in Victoria. But so if we're looking from a coach's perspective, right, male coach, female athlete, you mentioned just asking that question and obviously building a rapport. But how can we set that up so that it's a lot easier for male, especially fathers, they've never worked with young women before. How do we, what type of questions or what can we do beforehand to actually make sure that we're best looking after them and taking into consideration the menstrual cycle?
Yeah, I think it'd be so specific to the person, the coach, and the team. But just bringing it up somehow to start off with, like, you could use humor at the very start. A guy could just be like, all right, guys, like it could be the first time they're with the team. All right, guys, I have no idea about women things. I have no idea about periods. Please inform me. Please, let's talk about it. Like just in some way, building the rapport, but opening up the conversation. Because if a man has never spoken about periods or menstrual cycle with the girls, and the girls have never spoken about it to a coach, it's not going to happen.
And most of the time, most females haven't spoken to any male in their life.
Some people view it as really taboo and embarrassing. I really don't, so I can't speak on this point that well. But yeah, I just think it needs to be something that's actually talked about often enough for then the athletes to feel comfortable to bring it up themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's almost the whole thing of like mental health, that if you ask someone if they're okay or how are you doing enough times that they know that you're there, then when they actually need to speak about it, they will. Yeah.
When they feel like they're in the most vulnerable moment and they know that someone's continuing to ask them, it's like, hey, you all right? It's like that one moment they might actually approach you, or when you actually ask them for the 20th time, something like that, and be like, okay, I'm actually not all right. Okay, cool. All right, do you want to go somewhere quiet and just talk about it? And then obviously our goal is not to solve these problems. Our goal is to be aware of these issues and potentially how we can modify it to help them best navigate or manage what's going on in that period of time. But yeah, I think that's pretty helpful. I think, setting the stage probably right from the get-go. Yeah. To be like, ladies, girls, whoever you're talking to, it's like, I have no idea about the menstrual cycle or periods. What we're going to do is, it might be someone, can you start to inform me about it? I'm going to do a little bit of research about it. And I want to be educated, because my goal is to make sure that that all of you are performing at your best. Yeah. And if the coach has the right intentions and has no clue, then at least that's a better place than a coach, I guess a male coach, is trying to explain This is the menstrual cycle, 28 days, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, and you got like 3/4 of the girls. I'm like, I'm not sure about this. So yeah, coming from the right place and saying that, like, look, I really don't know much. I know a tiny bit, but it's probably not enough to really best serve all of you moving forward.
Yeah, and even because women generally don't have much idea on the cycle apart from what they feel. So like I've had a lot of conversations. I've just posted a bit on my coaching account and I've had that many people ask me about it because it's just not known. No idea about what it actually does to them other than like how they're feeling. So even if that male coach is saying, I'm interested and I want to research for you, like what do you feel? What do you know? And just kind of figuring out what they do know and what they don't know, because what they don't know is going to be a whole lot more than like what they do know about their own cycle.
Yeah, I would say as a male coach, the main thing is just have a general understanding of what's happening at each phase.
Mm-hmm.
Then I guess the girls and the females that you look after, you know, they can actually start to tell you, okay, I'm feeling like this. Okay, then you have a bit of an idea of where they are in the cycle and whatnot. So without going into too much detail. So cool. What we'll do is we'll reduce the intensity just for the time being, or reduce more so the volume than anything else. Reduce the volume, and next week we'll reassess and see if you're feeling better, and then hopefully, you know, they're feeling better and hit their normal weights than they normally would. So yeah, it's just like all these little things that can make your job so much easier as well, especially as a coach. Sports coaches specifically, just because the girls seem tired and lethargic, they may not actually be unfit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, it's that masking of their fitness because of what's actually happening internally that we can't actually see.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we don't necessarily ask about the period all the time. If someone is in pain, you're not just going to be like, are you on your period? Like, no. It's just basically if you are comfortable with the athlete, it's almost a little bit of intuition as well. Like if you think that it could be something other than their recovery methods, it could just be a point of conversation. Like, do you think, like, are you leading up to your period? And it's like, yeah. And it's like, okay, what can we do? Kind of thing.
Yep. That's pretty much it. And I think as a coach as well, if it is leading up to the period, yeah, then we can just, all right, we're going to drop volume back. You can start to prescribe and try different things. And obviously you want to, obviously you don't record when they're having the period. I guess that's the actual athlete's job. What you do is you just write down, you just change the volume or the intensity for that day. But then you just track that over time as well. Then you got, like, if you do that over 6 to 12 months, you've got a lot of data points and you know roughly when it's going to hit as well. So then from a planning perspective, then it's going to be a lot better moving forward.
On that, I want to talk about training as in planning a block. It's still not recommended to actually periodize around your menstrual cycle just because it's so variable and changes to do with stress, to do with nutrition, levels of exercise and all that sort of stuff. So it's still just advised for the athlete themselves to auto-regulate. Did I speak about this before? Yeah.
Just a quick hash on auto-regulation, if you haven't watched the other one, is basically just being able to have, a general self-awareness of how your body is feeling and performing on that day. So are you feeling, hot to trot, slept well, ate well, stress levels are relatively low, get after your training. If you're feeling miserable, tired, sleep, irritable, haven't eaten enough, nutrition is really poor, it's like, maybe let's dial it back a little bit. And auto-regulation, you might be feeling, one day you might be feeling like a 10 out of 10, which is great and you want to get after it. But sometimes you might be feeling a 6 out of 10, but your 10 out of 10 in terms of RP or your effort that you put in for that session might be considered like a 5 on the day that you're feeling really good. Mm-hmm. So in terms of where you are, can actually, like you said before, it can vary quite drastically with a lot of females.
Yeah, and I think we don't generally use RPE, but I think in the athletic world, a general RPE of like 7 is kind of typical. And then that just means that you don't necessarily increase your weight every session. You're just kind of seeing where your body is at with that specific weight at that period of time. So it could be decreasing leading up to your period and then kind of increasing after that and be like a cycle like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, a general rule of thumb. Like we use some level of, auto-regulation here, but what we try and do is ask them, it's like, how did that set feel? Could have done 3 or 4 more reps. Okay, cool. Next well, then we can potentially go up in weight as well. So we're always using some level of auto regulation. We don't really prescribe percentage of 1 RM. We don't do any RM testing here as well, which is, I don't think it's necessary anymore. There's better ways to measure force output and power and speed and all that jazz, besides just weight on the bar. That was really good, Zoe. Thanks for that. Thanks for the insights. Yeah, it's funny to relive that story again as well. You've got 18 to 21-year-olds all sounding off on you. It's like, oh, Jesus. All right, let's give me a moment and I'll get back to you.
No, but it's good to see that everyone over here is very open to learn about it as well, which is good.
Yeah, I think we just need just more open discussions, more longer format, and rather than just cut it off and it's like, oh, we don't talk about that because it's not, because men don't know about that stuff. It's like men should, or at least male coaches specifically, male parents should have an awareness and a general idea about it. Do they need to implement it? Not necessarily, no. Just they need just a general idea, because like I said before, there's multiple inputs that can create an output for a lot of athletes. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, we'll wrap that one up there. You have just listened to the Inner Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.